Alright, so the knife is out of heat treat now. You can see it's nice and black from the oils and the tempering. I just left it in my oven, in my kitchen. I did 2 cycles at 475 Fahrenheit for 2 hours each, and then I let it cool down in between each cycle. So that should give it plenty of spring. This is 50 to 100 steel, and I think that's going to land it around 57 on HRC, which is pretty hard on the edge still. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to work on the grinding a bit. It's almost down to the proper thickness. I want to get it down a couple more thousandths of an inch before I start polishing. Once I get this ground, I'm going to grind the tang a bit more. I left the tang rough, and I didn't grind the tang at all because I still am fiddling around with the shape and exactly how much I want this to be, like how thick I want this to be. I think it's still quite a bit too thick. I'm going to bring this down quite a bit yet. And then after that I'm going to drill the holes. And usually you want to drill the holes before you heat treat it, because now I'm dealing with hardened steel, at least on the edge part, and this is going to be a little tougher than if it was totally annealed. But I'm going to be using carbide tools, so it'll just cut through it pretty quickly. So yeah, the first thing I'm going to do, clean up my perimeters, and then I'll grind the bevels and get these down to the final thickness. Once that's done, onto the tank. Alright, so I've got the blade pretty much ground till the final shape. I'm just gonna, now it's ready for polishing, for hand polishing, but first what I gotta do is I'm gonna drill the holes in the tang. So what I did is I ground the tang flat, and then I spray painted it with black spray paint. And that's gonna allow me to take my my calipers and easily scribe in some lines so that I have a bit of reference for, some reference points for when I'm putting the pins in. Because I'm gonna want everything to be pretty much as close to even as I can get it. So let's see. Let's get this. So zero it. Put it to millimeters. Alright, 32 millimeters. So bring it down to 16 millimeters. There we go. 16.1. That should be good. There we go, so I did that line. Now I'm going to come in from this side too, just because it's going to be a bit different along right there. So now you can see I have that line, so I now have a general middle that I can follow. So I can do the same to this side. And on this edge here. There we go. So now I have my lines, and now I got to figure out where I want my pins. So I'm going to be using 3 pins. I'm using brass, and I'm going to have also one hole that's going to be one hole here is going to be for the brass tube, which is going to be for the lanyard hole. So let's see, does that show up on the? It's kind of hard to tell where I have my lines. Let me get some better lighting and see if that works. Or, how's that? Alright. So, you can see where I scribed on both sides my center line along that edge there. So, now let's see. Let me grab a scribe. Going to want one about right here. Too close. So when I'm putting in my lines, I want to make sure that I'm not too close to the junction point And the thing is, I left this really thick, which is going to be good. That way I'll have plenty of room to play around with this. Sorry, it's not going to be able to chip or break easily, so it shouldn't be too big of an issue where I put the pins, but you want to always make it look good, so I'm trying to visualize where it's going to be at the end. So if I'm bringing my handle to about here, this should be a good spot for one. Now, I'm going to have another one near the back. Let's bring it in along the middle of this. And, well, so I'm going to guess that my wood's going to come out about 11, let's say, yeah, 11 millimeters from this pin. So 11 millimeters from this edge, I'm going to do another scribe line. And that's going to be where my pin is going to be located. So I'm going to go right in the middle here. Alright, so I've got that. Now, I'm going to do that to the other side too. So. Yeah, just to make sure I have the 11 millimeters. So I have that pin and this pin here. Now I'll do the one in the middle. So I'm measuring 100, about 100. So yeah, let's bring it down to 50 millimeters. .1, that should be close enough. Scribe it there. Right there, so that's where my other pin is going to be. So that's where my 3 pins are on this side. I'm going to flip it around and make sure that I have them. Actually, well, you only need to put them on one side because that's where we're drilling. So I'll center punch it. I'll be right back. Let me grab a punch. I have my center punch right here. So take. Oh no, wait, this isn't the center punch. Alright, just so you can see, I'm going to show you how I have my line set up. So that's how I have my lines ready for my. Yeah, there's the middle, and there's the end. And I'll add in the hole for the lanyard hole. I'll add that in later. First I want to get these drilled. So I'm going to center punch them. Oops. Alright, so got the holes drilled. Went about as good as you can imagine, with the steel being somewhat hard. I ended up having to use a carbide mill for this one here, but everything worked out good. I went with 3/16 holes, and I think that should be good for the brass rod. Doesn't look too big or too small. So now I'm going to take my belt grinder, and I'm just going to grind in a groove here so that we can fit more epoxy. So that'll be just connecting these the holes here. After that, then I'm just going to move on to polishing the blade. So yep. Alright, so off camera I tempered the spine back a little bit more, that way it'll be a little more flexible and shock absorbent. The edge I left still, you can see it's a little bit yellow on the edge, which is what you want. So this has already been tempered twice in the oven, but this will just give it a little bit more of temper along the edge. And then you can see right down here, I tempered it right around here a lot, because you don't want to have a hard spot right here, because this is where a lot of the shock is going to be. If something hits, this is where it's going to be experiencing the most shock. So I gave it a pretty good spring temper there. Also off camera, I just ground in the grooves here. This is just for more epoxy to go in there. It gives it a bit more of a place to grab. So now it's on to the part that takes the longest, which is hand polishing. So I'm gonna start off with, I think, 180 grit sandpaper, and wet and dry, and with a steel backing and just sand up and down the blade until I get it nice and even, and then I'll go up the grits. Alright, so now I'm ready to polish. I've got a piece of sandpaper. I put spray adhesive on a piece of flattened steel, and I'll have the sandpaper. I'm just going to go up and down and polish it up. I also have WD-40 in a jug, and that's going to be my lubricant to keep it all going good, and to clear the metal shavings out of the way. Yep, so I'm just going to keep going like that for a while until I get it nice and flat and polished. Alright, so now we have it finished polished up. I brought it up to 600 grit. I used a couple different techniques. So first, with the rough grit, I had it at, I used the steel backing on sandpaper. And then once I had the rough grits worked out, then I moved into finer and finer grits using softer and softer backings in order to get a better polish. So that's the finished polished blade. So all I have to do now is finish up the handle, and the handle material that we're going to go with is a type of ebony. I forget what type of ebony, but it's a lighter color ebony. It's not the black ebony you're used to thinking when you think ebony. So I'm going to be doing that. We're going to have brass liners and brass pins. So yep. Now onto the handle. Okay, so now I have the blade fully polished. I put tape on it just to make sure that I don't scratch the blade. The tang has been flattened and I got all the holes drilled, the last of the holes. I had to temper the back here a little bit more, but everything turned out pretty good. And now we're going to start working on the handle. So the wood that we're going to be using is called Macassar ebony. It's kind of hard to see the grain in this lighting. Let's see if I can find a bit better light. It's from Indonesia, the Philippines, somewhere around there. And it's very hard, very expensive, but it's a beautiful wood. It's kind of hard to see in this lighting, but it's got tons of action in it. The grain is great. The color is really nice. So we're going to be using this. It's probably going to cut pretty hard, so that should be interesting, but I got some fresh new sanding belts, so that shouldn't be a problem. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to trace the outline of my tang on a piece of paper, and I'm going to trace what I want for the handle. And then I'm going to start laying it out on here to make sure that I have it where I want, and can save as much of this material as I can. Then I'm going to place the knife over here and drill the holes. So yep, we'll give that a go. Okay, so you can see that I have the knife clamped onto the block of wood now. I made sure that everything was nice and level because I don't want this drill bit going in at an angle. Because if it goes in at even slight angle, it's going to make the pins off center later, and when I go to line up the scales, the pins and the pinholes aren't going to be lined up exactly right, which is going to mean that either I have to drill them out more, or you're just going to have to throw out that piece of wood because it won't be worth anything. But this wood's extremely expensive, so I do not want that to happen. This little block costs $32, so I want to make sure that I use I'm very careful, so that's why I've clamped it down. I'm going to go slowly, carefully, make sure that everything is lined up perfectly. And the block itself is extremely flat. I checked that already, and I'm just going to go slowly and carefully. Alright, here we go. Alright, looks like it worked. The pins are still lined up, it looks like. So I think should be alright. Alright, so got the holes drilled. Now what I'm gonna do is gonna lay out the pattern from there. I'm gonna put pins in my knife and then set the pins in here, and then I'm gonna describe in the pattern the outline, and then I'm gonna cut it on my bandsaw. Alright, so I have the handle shape scribed in there with a Sharpie, and now I'm gonna cut it out of my bandsaw. I'm interested in how this is gonna cut. It seemed to drill not too bad, but it was still pretty hard to drill, so I'm thinking it's gonna be pretty hard on the bandsaw. Alright, so it's actually cutting pretty easily, so I'm just going to finish up the cut on the rest of the handle and I'll be back. Okay, so the cutting went good. I got the shape all blanked out. Now I'm going to split it down the middle so that I can get two even sides for the scales. So this part is also pretty tricky. What I did here is I set up the fence on my bandsaw, and I set it up so it's exactly halfway down here. I used my calipers to sorry, I'm forgetting words. My calipers to line it up exactly in the middle. So I measured it. I measured what it was in length, brought it down to half, and half of that was 11.25. So whatever that was, and then I brought the fence into the blade at 11.25. Millimeters, that is. So now all I have to do is cut it, and I'm going to go really slowly because it's going to have a tendency to warp with hard wood. So I'm going to just take it really slow. Alright, so off camera I cut out the brass sheets and I glued the handle up together. I just used a 2-part epoxy, and then I clamped it in my vise with a couple of clamps to let it set. So it's been sitting for about an hour. It's 5-minute epoxy and it cures in an hour, so I gave it plenty of time to sit. So now I'm going to take it apart and start grinding the handle. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to inspect and see how it looks. One thing I was being careful about when I did this is not to clamp it too tight, because I didn't want to split the wood or damage the wood at all. So it's looking pretty good. So it's mostly cured. It's a bit cold out here today, so it's still a little bit gummy, but not sticky, so that's good. So I'm going to start by cleaning up the perimeter on the belt grinder, and then I'm going to flatten it off, flatten off the sides, and then grind it down to shape. So, yep. Alright, so I've got the handle polished up. I sanded it to 600 grit, and then did a light pass with some 2000 grit sandpaper. And now it's ready for the oil. So this oil, I'm going to use tung oil. I'm not exactly sure what kind of oil to use on this wood, but I think that should work. And it's very hard, so when you sand it down it gives a nice shine already, so this oil is really going to make it pop. So what I'm going to do, take a paper towel, fold it a couple times, and here's the oil. Crack it open. see how it looks. Sweet. That looks cool. So, yeah, I like that. I don't know if you can tell on the camera, but it gives a nice dark shiny finish on there. And there's no stain in this oil. It's so it preserves the natural color. It's just going to seal it and keep it from getting any moisture in there, and it'll give it a nicer finish. So yeah, wow, I like that. So I'm going to keep polishing it with the oil for a little bit. Let it soak in there. I'm going to do a couple coats of this though, and once it's soaked up a little enough, then I'm going to take a fresh paper towel and just buff it with the fresh paper towel. So let me just make sure I get the front of the, right here, there we go. Beautiful. Alright, so yeah, I'll take a fresh paper towel and I'll just buff the whole surface with it. So you don't want to have too much oil in there, because if you have too much oil then it can get gummy and stick, so I don't want that. I want it to be nice and smooth. Wow, yeah, that's nice wood. So I'll bring that closer to you so you can see how it looks. Camera. Let's bring it over here. So yeah, it's kind of hard to tell from the camera, but it's I really like that wood. It's nice and dark. You can see how I have the brass liners in there, and the brass pins, the brass lanyard hole, and wow, yep, I like that quite a bit. So yeah, I'm gonna just keep buffing that up for a little bit more, and then I'll let it set for a couple hours and then do another buff.